Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Autism Family Life, bringing you all things autism, family, and life in 30 minutes or less. This episode is building up on the past few episodes where we have been talking about the initial diagnosis and dealing with some of those initial reactions. And it's one of those episodes that I was debating if I was going to put it earlier in the podcast season or if it was going to come later. But because we've been talking about it, I figured might as well just get it out of the way, kind of rip off the band-aid and do it now. So before we get into this week's topic, I would like to remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever it is that you are getting your podcasts. And if you are following along on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So on to this week's episode topic. As it has been mentioned in a past few episodes where we were talking about like the guilt and building a support network, this week's episode builds on that. Kind of dealing and managing with like the everyday situations. And it's one of those, like those moments when your autistic child is having a meltdown and you're looking at all the bills on the table. Maybe even there's like a pot of water boiling on the stove because you just can't figure out what else you're going to do for dinner. So your mind's already just kind of racing and you're already overwhelmed with all these things. And then you just don't know what else is going to happen. You don't know how else you're going to react. You don't know what else is going to take or how much you can take. So, this week's episode is all about talking about and addressing those moments when we're about to either have an emotional or mental breakdown as a mom of an autistic child or dad. And again, when I mentioned this on my Facebook page, I said, I apologize to any of the dads who might be listening. Usually when I speak, I'm talking to moms because I pretend, like I'm having this conversation with another mom. So again, dads, I apologize. I don't mean to, intentionally leave you guys out. So we were talking about that, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is because all it takes for me, um, it's that going back to those moments of like there's all the yelling in the background and there's all of the notifications for the bills um, or envelopes, whichever the case may be. And you've got like a million things that you could be putting together for dinner, but you just don't know where to start. So it's really just, you're like that pot of boiling water on the stove. It's all just coming together and boiling over. And that's really just what it's going to take. It's that one thing, that one moment where you're collapsing onto the floor in a heap of tears, your shoulders heaving as you're gasping for breath. And, it's like what they say with the situation when you're on the airplane, how you're supposed to put on your oxygen mask first, right? So you're supposed to be taking care of yourself first. But as moms, I think we really do tend to put ourselves last. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we can't pour from an empty cup. And if we aren't taking time to take care of ourselves and to really, make sure that we don't reach those boiling points, nothing else that we do between now and then is going to help. And oftentimes, aside from being, the primary parent, we are also primary caregivers. So we have this added stress of, or we can't really just walk away from all of this, even if as much there might be some times that we would really like to. And it's when we reach these like these small breakdown moments that I think we just need to let them happen if we are able to let them happen and as they are able to let them happen. And the reason I say that is because, my personal experience in all of it was that if I didn't let these moments happen, if I didn't let these little breakdowns happen, like those moments where I just needed to cry or I needed to curse or I needed to yell or stomp my feet or do something just to get it out, it was just kind of like spiraling and it was getting so much worse to the point where I could feel myself kind of coming into the point of like having a major anxiety attack or a major panic attack. And those for me are absolutely terrifying. So even if, dealing with the mental breakdown or the emotional breakdown in that moment is kind of, like I don't have time to deal with this crap right now. I would rather deal with one of those right now than try to deal with the major panic attack or anxiety attack later. And the reason I say that is because it takes me so much longer to recover from those bigger anxiety attacks. And, like I remember when I had my first panic attack. Um, of course, now I can't remember my exact age because this is what happens when you get older. You start forgetting all the exact details and stuff. And so, but I remember it happening, and I remember feeling like I was having a heart attack. That's what it felt like to me. Like my left arm was going numb, and my heart was racing, and like it felt like my heart was stopping, and I couldn't breathe, and it was really sucky feeling. And so, I went to the emergency room because, again, I thought I was having a heart attack. And they sent me home with one of those Holter monitors. I just remember that thing being so stupid, like awkward, like sized and so uncomfortable. And, they told me to record, hit the button to record all these moments when I felt my heart spiking or my heart rate being abnormal. So I did. And this was like, I think it was a 24-hour thing. And then I had to go follow up with my doctor, and I look at the results, and like, oh, you know what? We think you had a panic attack. It's like I don't have panic attacks. I don't have anxiety. Um, but, looking back on it, I probably, and I think I've talked about this before. I am hesitant to get myself formally diagnosed because I have that diagnosis already with the clinical depression, but uh, I'm hesitant to get the other diagnosis. And I don't know why. Um, I do know why. I just have not been able to pinpoint the exact why. But, like my biggest thing is that if I know how to cope with these things and I have my own self coping strategies, some of them are better than others, and some are more effective than others, then I feel like, okay, I have this handled and I can keep these things in check. And for the most part, I can. But then there's sometimes that I can't. And I think that was what was really frustrating for me in that, for the most part, I know how to handle these things. But then when it comes to the point that I can't handle them, I get so frustrated with myself and it just compounds the situation. So that's why I think, when we feel that we are on the verge of having those mental or emotional breakdowns, maybe, yeah, sometimes we just need to let them happen and we need to let ourselves just kind of fall apart. So you need to let yourself cry and you need to let yourself feel things because when you don't let them happen, they just start compounding and they just start getting worse. And then it's just going to become a bigger mess and it's going to become a bigger problem. And those little breakdowns are just our body's way of telling us that we need to have this release. And one of the reasons that we have them, one of the reasons we deal with them is sometimes it might just be those everyday parenting stressors, but other times it's because of a lack of self care, because we, as moms, and again, as dads as well, or where whoever might be in this role of both primary caregiver and primary parent, we are bombarded with just so many things on our plates and we don't take the time for ourselves that we should be taking, which is a huge mistake. And, I'm plenty guilty of that too, because we start to think that, if we're taking times for ourselves, we're being selfish. And we're not being selfish, you know? It's not being selfish to take care of ourselves, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not in the best place to take care of our families. So when we have those moments where we're having those mental breakdowns or the emotional breakdowns, those moments, you know, where you feel like you're going to go curl up in a corner and cry, or where you're going to scream at the top of your lungs, where you're just about to lose control, sometimes you might just need to let it happen, but you need to remember that you're going to come out on the other side and you are going to be stronger for it. And, you know, for myself personally, I hate having people seeing me cry, or I hate having people see me in like moments of weakness, because I feel like I'm vulnerable and I'm not as strong as I should be or that I could be. But you know, it's really the opposite. Um, when you are being courageous enough to show people that yes, you feel, yes, you have these moments where you just can't keep it together, and yes, you have these moments where, you know, of weakness, really, that's what it is. But it's not being weak, it's being strong, because you're telling people and you're showing people that yeah, you might be a crying, crumbling mess on the floor right now, but you're going to bounce back and that you're going to be okay, and that you're going to be equipped to handle all these other things. And this was one of those things, again, that I was really, you know, debating if it was going to be addressed earlier in the podcast or if it was going to be addressed later on in the podcast. But it was, what it came down to for me was just kind of realizing that, you know, it has to come out and it has to be talked about. So after being over on my Facebook page and, you know, just putting out these two little videos, one of which addressed this topic on the mental breakdowns, and the other that addressed, you know, granting yourself grace. And so that ties into this, which is, you know, having the mental breakdowns and the emotional breakdowns and just kind of dealing with them. And I realized I kind of did it backwards when I put those videos out, because the granting yourself grace part comes after the mental breakdowns and the emotional breakdowns. And it's not so much that you're forgiving yourself, but you are granting yourself this grace, this moment really, to just kind of be a human being, and to kind of acknowledge that not everything is going to go right all the time. And that's okay too. And that, you know, for me personally, that's been one of my other biggest struggles. I am what you would call a recovering perfectionist. So for me, when these things, or in the past, when things would go wrong, and it was just, you know, it could have been like little things or it could have been big things, but even the little things for me were big things. And it just became this setback, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. So then I got to that point where I could start letting go of things, and I could start saying like, okay, whatever, it's just not going to get done today, or maybe it's just not going to get done at all. So I had to learn how to grant myself that grace as well. You know, just kind of forgive myself. And I'm not talking about the kind of grace that you hear about in the song Amazing Grace. I'm talking about the everyday grace and that everyday forgiveness, to say to yourself that you're doing enough and that you don't need to do more. You are doing everything that you can with what you have in your situation. And that's, I think, one of the other most important things to remember in this whole parenting thing, and tying back into this breakdown thing, is that even the strongest, or those who appear outwardly to be the strongest of us, mentally, emotionally, physically, we are still weak. We still have our moments of weakness. We still have our moments of vulnerability. And that's okay, because we're just human beings. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all we can be, is just a human being. And that's what our kids need from us. That's what our families need from us, is for us to just to be a human being, and to be, you know, like the best version of ourselves that we can in that moment, with whatever we are capable of bringing. So even on those days and on those moments, and you know, like I've been there too. I'm there really, I like almost every single day in the trenches. Well, I don't want to say in the trenches, but I'm there almost every single day, in terms of, okay, I'm holding it together. Some days are better than others. Some hours, even on some days, are better than others. But you know what? We pull through it because we have to. But at the end of the day, remember that you are only human, that you are doing the best you can, and to grant yourself grace. And if you aren't already doing it, for the love of everything that is holy and everything that you believe in, find time for yourself. Even if it's just 5 minutes out of the day, 10 minutes out of the day, however long it is, find some time for yourself. Okay? So just keep those things in mind, and I will be back next week.